Good morning. Good to see all of y'all here this morning. We have a guest speaker with us today, so we want to give him as much time as we can. Several years ago, this congregation began supporting mission work in India, and it was headed up by a man named Ron Clayton. Ron died several months ago, but the work continues, and one of the individuals who's working with that program is Joe Evans. Joe is here with us today, his wife Diane. They actually live in Hot Springs. He owned his own business for a number of years. He graduated from a Christian with a degree in business administration. His wife at one time was a dental hygienist. They have now gone full-time in India mission work. His focus is on training and mentoring leaders, getting men ready to serve as elders, which in the mission field is probably a greatly needed facet of that work. I'm not going to take up any more of his time. I'll let Joe have the floor. So, Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Thank you for allowing Diane and I. My wife is up in the crow's nest, and she's going to be in charge of my slides. Just want to say it's an honor to be with you. This is my first time at this congregation. Kind of amazing. I just grew up 40, 50 miles from here. But I grew up in the Boonville Magazine area much of my life. Owned a business in Northwest Arkansas, which allowed me to travel to India. Ever since I got out of college, for more than 30 years now, we've been traveling to India. But only in the last few years have I been full-time. I worked with Ron Clayton's team when I first traveled. Back in 1990, I think was my first trip to India. And I can't keep up with how many trips now, but just want to say what an honor it is to be here, and to thank you for supporting us, for praying for us, encouraging us. And I just want to tell you up front, you're just going to get a glimpse. I could literally spend all day with what's being done and my business background. I want to tell you every nuts and bolts of what we're doing, how we're doing, and how I measure success on the mission fields. And just letting you know, you're just going to get a glance. Okay, I got about 50 slides, and let's see if I can get through many of them. I just realized I need my glasses. I just want to say up front, if you have any questions at any time, get my attention, throw your hands up, ask me. I don't mind. I wanted this to be a very lax and conversational. I'm going to tell you a lot of several points about what we're doing and why, and give you a glimpse of India and what's been happening the last couple of years with COVID, even over there. But if you have any questions, just I don't mind answering them at all. In fact, if I can time it right, Roger, I'll try to leave 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. But again, don't feel like you have to wait. One of the first things before I begin about India, let me just say that, just keeping the back of your mind, missions is actually participating in God's purpose. That's all missions is. And we can't all go. Some of us have to send. Some of us have to write letters of encouragement. There's so many functions going on in the missions effort. And I just want you to know that just because you haven't been doesn't mean that you aren't participating in God's purposes. The other thing I want you to know is that, this is just my personal opinion, after 30-something years of doing mission work in a variety of countries, I think I've been over 18, 19 countries probably. India is still my favorite. I believe there are 3 elements to a successful mission effort. I just want to tell you right out before I start. You got to preach the word. You have to be evangelistic in your effort. You need to develop the local churches, because in the long run, It's not just a matter of did we leave and convert some believers, but are they going to be there for the generation? Are we going to have to re-evangelize that area every 20 years or every generation? And then lastly, which is what Diane and I do much, that is our role in this. There's 5 couples part of our India missions team. And we all have different functions and roles within that team. And from my background, because I didn't grow up being a preacher. I wasn't a preacher by nature. I looked and viewed congregations in India from a little different perspective. That of what's going on with the leadership, what's going on, who's developing and mentoring the elders. That's kind of, so training local Christians for all areas of ministry. If you're not doing those 3 things, to me, it's hard to define that you're having a successful mission effort. So I just want you to keep that in mind of that's how we define our success. India is a unique place. I don't know how else to say it. It's a unique people. It's a unique work that we have. India is basically a third of the size of the U.S., but literally has almost 20% of the world's population. About 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7 people on the planet live in that little country. There's a term that's coined by the Christian mission strategist, specifically if you know or have heard of the Joshua Project. They identify this area of the world that we are in as the 1040 window. Anybody heard of the 1040 window? 1040 window is the 10th and the 40th parallel north of the equator. And is it behind me? Yes, that little window, the shade behind me, literally 5.5 billion of the 7 billion people on the planet live right in that window. 60% of the world's poor lives in that window. Guess where the least evangelized place on the planet is? That window. According to the Joshua Project, 1.25% of all of the evangelistic budgets that we have in the West, that means Europe and the U.S., only 1.25% go to that window. And India's there. India's a hard place to travel to. Missionaries, it's hard to recruit missionaries to go there. It's a hard travel. It's a hard country. But it is the greatest need, in my opinion, is in that area. India is a country of contrast. 70% of all Indians live about the same way that the U.S. did in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You had a daily wage. You had a rural job. You worked on a farm. You probably didn't own the land. Maybe you were a sharecropper. 70% of India, even today, and India is a third world country trying to become a second world country. I know the tech world. Bill Gates has dumped billions of dollars. Hyderabad, India is the Silicon Valley of the world today, and Bangalore. Those of you call tech places with your laptops or something, probably got an Indian voice. But India is still a very rural country. You make a daily wage, most daily wages are about, for a guy, $2.5 a day, women half. And if you don't work that day, you didn't get paid that day. That's kind of... And though India is so rural, 8 of the largest cities in Asia are in India. There are 8 mega cities in India, which means cities over 10 million. Hyderabad is where our offices are out of. We work out of Hyderabad. Hyderabad's only the 7th largest city in India, but it's 10% larger than New York City. It just shadows to you how many people are in India. It's just amazing. India, and I like telling people that, ask, what's it like in India? What's it like? You guys read Acts 17 lately? Paul walking through Acts 17. He's walking through Athens. He's looking around, he's speaking at the Areopagus, and he recognizes, guys, it looks like you guys are very religious people. India is a religious people. It's made up of Hindus. 99% of the country worship something. It may be Buddhism, it may be Jain, it may be Hindus, it may be Muslim. 10% of the population in India is Muslim. But they worship. And so when you walk through an average village, an average town, an average city of India, the first thing that you would notice, man, these people are religious. They worship. You don't have to preach to them about praying. They know how to pray. And just like Paul in Acts 17, we're the guys that come in off the street and go, let me tell you about the one God you don't know about. Roger, if you like to preach, India is a preacher's dream. Preachers that go to India for the first time from the U.S. have no voice after 6-7 days. You just have to take a week off and rest. The opportunities to preach. Because like in Acts 17, they have such a readiness of mind to hear whatever you have to say about God. I can't think of a time that where I wasn't welcomed onto a radio station, TV station, a bank, a school. A public school would welcome you. And if you want to talk about God, you have all day long. So the opportunities in India are endless for those reasons. I said India's there's a lot of contrast. India has some of the most beautiful buildings. Anybody heard of the Taj Mahal? India doesn't even consider that to be the most gorgeous building they have. There's some gorgeous buildings. The thing is, with India is there will be a slum right next to it. Some of the most beautiful things and some of the things that are most heartbreaking to you, you get to see in the same eye shot. Over here, we kind of separate those things. There's the good side of town, there's the bad side of town, and they shouldn't meet. Not in India. Our mission teams, as mentioned, we are probably one of the largest teams working in Asia, Indochina area. We have 5 couples, as I said, we all have distinct roles. And without bearing you with a bunch of numbers, that we have tens of thousands of gospel meetings every year. We have thousands every month. Not because we're something special of the preaching realm, but there's so much opportunity. So each month we have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of meetings every month. There are 28 Indian states, 2 territories. We work in mostly about half of them. India has a Bible Belt, just like the U.S. And we have so much opportunity in South Central India. Much of our work is predominantly in that South Central part of India. There are lots of reasons that people are open to the scriptures in India. One of them is just, if you know anything about Hinduism, they have no hope. They have no hope. Most of the Indians are very, very poor, even by their standards, not by ours. And the last thing they want to do is what Hindus teach. They have to come back and live life again. And the last thing they want to do, one of their favorite verses, once converted, one of their favorite places is the book of Hebrews, where they're told, you don't have to come back and do this life again. They just fall to their knees and thank God. Because life is tough there. And the last thing they want to do is do this life again, like the Hindus believe that they need to do. Diane and I, we do something a little different. I told you we have kind of a unique role on our team. And anybody hear of a man named Titus in the New Testament? Anybody remember what Titus did? What was Titus, Timothy, Barnabas? What was their role? Were they great preachers? I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe. But Paul in 1 Corinthians 3, around 10, 11, somewhere in that area, it says He's the expert builder of churches. And one thing that we've done in India since the 60s is we know how to preach. Churches of Christ, we know how to preach, and we know how to set up a preacher training Bible school. But here's what we found out as I got more and more working in India, is that it was rare to find a Titus. Because we Americans can't live in India. It's a third world country that we cannot live in. We can go and visit for a month or two, maybe 3, that's pushing it, and then we got to come home. And throughout the decades, the churches of Christ, we didn't mean to, but we forgot all about how Paul, like in Titus 1:5, after he established a church, he sent Titus back. When Paul went on to preach some other town or some other village, Titus was needed. Well, here's what Diane and I do. We teach and train Tituses. We teach Timothys. We put them on salary and we send them to areas, to districts, to colonies of India who basically are relatively new congregations. And we establish them to have a vision, to have a hope in themselves, to develop a leadership. I would say probably 90% of all elders that we can find in Indochina area came through our work. We have some schools set up that we bring future men that will be future Tituses. We teach and train them for a period of time, and then we send them out. Give them some funds to send them out. So I think there's nothing that frustrated the Apostle Paul more than a congregation still drinking milk after a couple of years. He couldn't stand it. It frustrated him to no end. And in India, it's no different. India, it is so easy because most American teams that come over to India, what do they want to do? They want to preach. Because you can do that all day long, anywhere you want. What's missing often is we forgot to send Titus. And that's the business that I'm in. That is my role on the team of developing Tituses that will go back and hold the hand of that preacher as he develops and matures congregations so that we don't have to come back every 10 years or every 20 years and re-evangelize the same area. That church can do it by themselves. We used to hear a saying back in 1990, I went to a World Mission Workshop and they talked about how, India is too poor to support their own preachers. India is too poor to build their own buildings. I'm not picking on India. Pick any third world country. That's what we say that. Now I'm here to tell you this morning, that's not true. We have proved that wrong. A poor congregation can support a poor preacher. A poor congregation can build their own buildings if they knew that they had no other choice. They can do that. And so I just want you to know that that's our goal. That's our goal with this team, is not just planting churches, and we plant churches by the thousands every year. For those of you who don't know, this may come as a surprise, the center of Christianity on this planet is not in the West. There are 3.5 times more congregations that I can find in India than in the U.S. In fact, I'll go so far to say North America, Central America, and South America combined. That's what we've done in the last 20, 30 years. You've helped send us. Because when we first started doing this in 90, that wasn't the case. And maybe you've read the newsletters through over the years and go, man, those numbers sound really ridiculous. If I grabbed you today and went to an average Indian village, and I got to tell you, you're not even on an Indian political map unless you're 1 million. Uh-oh. Am I doing that, Gary? Sorry. If you're not a village of 1 million people, you're not on India's political map. The average size of an Indian village is about 5,000. And the hardest thing that it would take, the hardest thing about speaking in a village of 5,000 is where you're going to put them. Where are you going to put them? We have to block off streets. We have to block off sections of town. We have to do it in a way that we're don't want to get the attention of local police. Drawing a crowd isn't the hard part in India. Them listening to what you have to say is not the hard part. The hard part is, what are you going to do now with all these people you just converted? You're not going to convert everybody. Everybody will listen. And some go, I want to get out of this, whatever I'm in. I don't know how many times. You've probably read this in print, where you go to an African or an Indian place and share the gospel that's never heard the gospel before, and someone from the back row comes up to you later and says, I always knew there was a God like that. I just knew it. I just didn't know his name. Happens all the time in India. The hard part is, you've got to go home. And who's going to stay? And that takes a network of people. And our India missions team, we try to put together networks, not just that who will hold the gospel meetings, who will produce these numbers, who will do this, but who's going to stay after you leave and develop and mentor these men and women. Any questions so far? I know I'm moving a mile a minute.
You mentioned a short period of time, 1 month, 3 months. Is that because of the legalities there?
Yes. The government, the question was asked, why just 1, 2, or 3 months? There is not a single Westerner that can go to India for the purpose of evangelism. In the 1950s, when their constitution was first written up after after they left the British, there were so many missionary visas that could have been issued. And once those missionaries died off, they would never replace them. So the only way we can get into India at all is through tourism. And we can be invited by a native Indian to speak, to work, to preach, but you have to be invited. And the Indian government, especially over the last 10 or 12 years, just makes it so difficult that if you are on their radar, your visa will be canceled. You won't be able to come back in. So we have to work ways that if I want to come back to India next year, I can't overstay my welcome. If they know that I'm over there 3 months every single year, the same time, and I'm not doing some tourism, I would say since the 60s, about 60% of all Church of Christ missions have been rejected at some point getting back in the country. They just figured, the government figures it out. So what Diane and I do, we make sure we stay under the radar. We look like tourists. We act like tourists. We'll go to Goa, we'll go to Agra, we'll do things that tourism do. So that will ensure that I get back in the next year and work. We have a huge, huge network of preachers. We've worked with I know this is going to sound crazy, I want to say over 35,000 preachers. And when I say preachers, I mean local level. There's no local preachers in India that just preach at one congregation. But there are tens of thousands of guys that we work with. And in order to do that, we're all over India. It's easy to look like a tourist. It's easy to behave like a tourist. And as long as we don't come over in groups of, I don't know if you guys know, did you know Charles Scott or J.C. Bailey or any of those names ring a bell? When they first started, they would go to places like Freed-Hardeman and in Florence, Alabama. A lot of them came from the Florence area, IBC. And they would go over in groups of 20 or 30 preachers. They never got asked back. So you kind of have to do that to kind of stay under the radar a little bit. We have to look and act like tourists if we want to get back in. Good question. Let me just throw out this. India is a unique country in a variety of ways because they can travel with their visas anywhere in the world. Indians travel everywhere, places that you and I can't. Let me give you just a quick tip. We have preacher training schools that we help operate, including the leadership training schools. And we have people who, because those of you who know the Middle East very well, the Emirate states don't work. If you're in Saudi, you're a citizen of Saudi Arabia, you don't have a job. You know who works? Indians. Indians go to those places. They go to places like Abu Dhabi, Dubai. All these places, especially in Saudi Arabia. And Indians are setting up churches throughout the Middle East. You know, there are 22 congregations that we know about in Saudi Arabia. They're over the size of 30 people. Indians, those Indians that we taught and mentored, because of their visas, not because they're high caste and they got good paying jobs over there, just the opposite. They're the work class. And they're going to places like Saudi, Qatar, UAE. And the church is growing in places that it would just blow your mind because of our work in India. I just had to throw that out. Yes, ma'am.
Well, preacher from here, let's say, goes into a village he's never preached in before. I don't know if he's on the first one or not. Where would he start with his teaching?
I think that's a good question. In fact, I like to ask Americans that. If you were in that village, the question was asked, a local preacher, when he goes to the village and churches first established, what does he teach? I love asking American preachers that all the time. Guys, let me give you a scenario. You're in the backwoods of Africa or India somewhere. You're with me. We just converted 12 families. What's next?
I was really referring to before the 12 families.
Oh, before the 12 families. What do you say? Oh, that's a good question too. In India, imagine in the United States, every time you cross the state border, the language change. There are about 30 different languages, 300 dialects. And so every state not only has their own language, but they have their favorite god. Hinduism has thousands and thousands of gods that they worship. Every state, every district, every village has their favorites. So one of the things we ask ourselves is, where are we and who's their favorite god? And 80% of the crowd is probably Hindu. There's probably some Muslim in there as well. So can I throw it back on you? We do a variety of things. Where would you begin? Roger, can I put you on the spot? You're with me. You're in India. The village has never heard the gospel before. Where do you begin?
I think you start with the existence of God and then you move into authority. I think the big issue in most religions today is where you get your authority.
Okay. I like both answers. Anybody else got a, what would you do? Acts 17, one of my favorites. I'll tell you where I start just because, I don't know why. It just becomes my favorite. I walk them through the first 6 chapters of Romans. Because to me, those 3 chapters will encompass some Muslims, some people who believe that they're right now, and some people that have never heard or worshiped, anything. And there are plenty of jumping off places, I think. But no one, I'm doing that, sorry. Knowing where they are. And in India, that could be at any different levels. It would not surprise me anymore, after being there for 30 years, that the village knows something about Christianity. But very often, and I think that if you really think about it, this would be a fear, if Hindus, which is 80% of the population, if they believe in thousands and thousands of God, how do you know that Jesus that you're about to tell them about is just going to be 1001? And so we start with the uniqueness of, someone said Acts 17. I do that a lot too. You're very religious people, you know about. And so we'll spend a few minutes talking about what they believe now. And that is so different depending on what district and where you are. So you'll have a translator, and before you get up, you may think you know what you're going to talk about. But your translator is going to go, Joe, you may want to change the topic. You always got to be on guard of where to begin. So just think in terms of whether you're teaching. I tell preachers it's kind of like teaching Bible class to our youth. You got to know where they are if you're going to keep their interest. Now, they'll listen to everything that you say. In fact, I'll go so far to say is once you're finished, they're going to go knock on their neighbor's door, come back and go, will you repeat it again? Will you do it again? And it may be midnight that you're doing it for the third time in that village because they keep going and getting people back. I trust my translators to figure out who's in the crowd. That will the best way to answer. But I love starting in Acts 17. I love starting the first 6. And if I have the time, 12 chapters of Romans. There's a lady that's taken many trips. Her favorite thing is just walking through John. Walking through the Gospel of John. She said, you can't keep him out of the water. John's different. It's like he throws open his wallet and says, I want you to see a picture of Jesus here, and here he is here, and here. You're just going to fall in love with him. So, I love the question. I'm telling you, there's no one point. I rely on my translator to say, here's who you got. And you may change. You may be there for an hour and decide we need to skip up. But absolutely, you have to hit hard because of their background. There is only one God. I don't know how much time I've got. Anybody got any other questions? I flew through some of that. There's a...
You're saying that a majority of people would be open to the idea of the one God?
They are. They're very interested because they are at the same time frustrated. It's unique for us to think of in terms of what you're worshiping right now, you're frustrated at. They are. If you're Hindu especially, they really, really are. And India is becoming more educated. India has always had an educated caste. And if anybody ever tells you India got rid of their caste system, it's not true. I would say it's more embedded now than ever. And so they've always taken education seriously. The difference in the last 15 years is India is now they have a middle class that they've never had. And they're being more and more educated. And the more educated these youth are, and I need to throw this out, this is unique about India, half the population is 19 years and younger. And they're on the internet, and they have phones in this past decade. In fact, India subsidizes family with phones, so they've got, many kids have 2 or 3 of them. And who do you think they're looking up? We have this credibility in the West with Indian young people that I can't put my finger on. I don't understand it. I don't know why. But if you're white, you have credibility. There's some awesome local preachers that could be preaching to this village for a year. But because someone like me showed up and said it right next to him, oh, it must be true. The young people have this attitude. And so there's so much that they are learning about us and know about us. They can't connect all of the dots, but we absolutely have their ear. And if we say it, or someone that I bring is saying some of those messages, they cling on to it like you won't believe. You're from the West. And remember, in the Hindu mentality is, we in the West, we must have lived a pretty good, faithful, godly life, or righteous lives, for the last 1,000 lives, or 10,000 lives. You must be something awesome, because you live in the West, you have wealth that they can only dream of. So anything that you say has instant credibility. And I can't stress how this may be a good time to be. One of the things that we get to, okay, now it's time to decide if I'm going to become a Christian or not. Let me tell you this about India in case you don't know. In India, if you were the lower caste system since 1950s, you got to keep your civil rights if you stayed Hindu. If you converted to be a Christian, guess what you have to legally do? You go to the courthouse and you change you're no longer Hindu, you're now a Christian. That puts you in a different caste. In India, politics and religion are one and the same. They are not separated. You become a Christian from a Hindu lower caste, we call it the Dalit caste, you lose every civil right that you have. That means your kids no longer have a seat at the local school. You no longer have the right to dial 911 and to make a police report of any kind. You lose all if you thought your kids were going to go to a college, a public college, because the different tribes, the different caste systems, they have so many seats. That seat's reserved for your kids if you're in that caste. You just lost it. And one of the things that we struggle with, especially in our leadership training, our eldership training, is because for the last 20, 30 years, churches have struggled with what do we do? Do we go to the courthouse and do I lose my job? Because my job, if you work in rice fields that are owned by the government, guess what? You're not now. You just lost that. You got to go work for somebody else. If you're a school teacher, and that's where a lot of the middle class is coming from, is they paid school teachers $100 to $300 a month, which is very middle class over there. Good enough that you can own your own home and buy your own car. No one wants to lose their job. So what do? Do you disobey the law so you can keep your job? That's one of the things that elders struggle with their congregations. As soon as we plant one, they got to figure out how open with this Christianity thing are we really going to be? They ask us white people all the time. And I tell them the same thing when they say, Joe, there's a guy in our congregation that has 6 wives, which is legal in India. Which 5 does he have to get rid of so he can become an elder? India's a different world. And I so try to stay out of social issues. My answer is, that's not a Joe question. You guys got to have to work this out. You guys have to, that's something you guys got to, all I can tell you is he can't be an elder. You figure the rest out. Because in India, boy, I could get on widows, talk about widows for a while. You can have multiple wives, and that when the wife is no longer living in his house, he's not legally obligated to take care of that child or that lady. And in India, if you are a widow or if you have just lost your husband, you're on the street. It's a shame to go back to your home. Indian society won't allow it. So widows are a big issue of what the churches are struggling with. What should we do with the widows? Because we don't like seeing them begging on the street, which is what's expected of them. India has many issues like that I so try to stay out of and say that's a church decision, not a Joe decision.
How impact has the effort to provide sewing machines? How do you impact that?
You must have read one of our articles. Diane wrote an article called Big, what was the name of it, Diane? Rada story. We do. India Missions Team, we try to find ways of how can we benevolently help. Was that the bell? That scared me. Real quickly, we try to find ways that what can we do without interfering or becoming a crutch. One of the things that we found out is we can help widows by giving them a business. And in India, a very easy business to get into is sewing. And so we buy sewing machines, which cost $75 to $100. If you read that newsletter, we went above and beyond because a congregation came to us and say, hey, we'll rent this lady a building. If you read Rada's story, she's a young widow in her early 20s and lost her 2 kids. The government can take them away from you. They don't want to see them become Christians. They want to see them stay Hindu. So they take as many orphans as they can. And we bought a commercial sewing machine for Rada and some material. We set her up in business. And that was such a success story. She got her kids back within months. She sent them to college. And churches around there, we set the tone with them. They no longer came up to us and say, hey, will you finance this, finance that? They'd come up and say, hey, here's all that we can do. Can you help us? And we'll do some of that. And so we'll put out the challenges that if they have certain issues like that, like Rada, we'll help them buy sewing machines and things. It happens often. Good question. All right, I got a couple minutes. And I have 8 hours of notes. So I'm about ready to ask you a question. I hope I gave you a glimpse. I wasn't trying to tell you every detail and everything about our missions.
I couldn't help but notice the people you were showing, all of them seem to be dressed neatly, cleanly. I assume probably the normal dress of the Indian.
That would amaze me, especially ladies, if you ask Diane. That amazes. They are a colorful people. They are just bright colors. By nature, they are the most loving, servitude, humble people you'll ever meet. And their clothes reflect that, and they love. Now, they have some nice clothes, and they may only have one. But I was always amazed at their hospitality, how clean they are. And I'm telling you guys, I listened to my great-grandmother when I was real young talk about life in the late 1800s. It reminds you of that. I don't know if you've seen some of the transportation, the trains. I just felt like I was walking through the United States in the late 1800s. And my grandmother said, we didn't have much, but it was clean. And their homes aren't very big. They may have 2 rooms. But I'll tell you, you can eat off the floor. Now, it's a dirt floor. But they think it's clean enough to eat off of. I assure you. Good question. Any other questions, thoughts? I hope I piqued your interest. I hope I gave you a little glimpse of what we do. We have newsletters. I have some pamphlets I'm going to pass out to people just so that you'll have my name and phone number. Anyone not getting a newsletter, I told Robert, just let me know and I'll make sure you get them. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. You're dismissed. Thank you.